Well, tonight we're going to look at Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. We're beginning a brand new act. It's also a brand new chapter in this book. Act 1 goes back to chapter 1, and we entitled it Death and Emptiness. Not a good way to start off a story, but that was Naomi's story. She loses her husband. She loses both of her sons. She ends up with nothing. At the moment, she's in Moab. She comes back to the land of Israel. One of her daughters-in-law stays in Moab, but Ruth won't let go of her, and she travels back to the land of Israel with her. And at the end of chapter 1, Naomi is beside herself. She's angry at everybody, including God, for what has happened in her life. In Act 2, it's the search for short-term security. Now we have two widows, Naomi and Ruth, living in the ancient world. And if you're a widow living in the ancient world, that's bad news, because it was a man's world back in the ancient world. And if you were a woman, you needed a man, literally, to take care of you. But Ruth has an idea. She looks around and notices that there's absolutely no food in the house, and she would like to eat. So she says to Naomi, I'm going to go out and glean in one of the fields. And maybe somebody will be gracious to me and I can bring home some grain and we can cook it up and survive. And she goes out to a field not knowing where she's going. She ends up in a field owned by a man named Boaz. And Boaz happens to know her story and how kind she was to Naomi. So Boaz decides to be extra kind to Ruth, kind of returning the favor to her. And Ruth brings home so much food that Naomi is just, she snaps out of her depression, and now she begins to experience joy. Now they know they're not going to starve to death. Somebody is going to take care of them. But when we get to Act 3, there's another problem. The problem is Ruth is still single. She needs a husband. Naomi has decided she's not getting married again. She's too old. She doesn't want to do that. But since she's Ruth's only relative in the land of Israel, she takes it upon herself to try to find Ruth a husband. And she comes up with this crazy plan, and Ruth is courageous enough to pull it off. And it looks like at the end of chapter 3, there's hope. Boaz may be their redeemer. Boaz could become Ruth's husband, but we're told that there's a closer relative, and he has the right of first refusal. So Boaz cannot say yes to Ruth yet. He has to have a conversation with this other man to see if he would like to be the kinsman redeemer, and if not, then Boaz promises he will do so. And that's where we left off in Act 3. We pick up with Act 4. And Act 4, in many ways, is the very opposite of Act 1. Act 1 was death and emptiness. This is redemption and fullness. Redemption will take place in chapter 4. In fact, Boaz insists that it will, because either the nearer relative will do it or he will do it. So there will be redemption in this chapter, and there will be fullness once again. Naomi begins the story. She has a husband and 2 sons, and they're doing well. And for a woman in the ancient world, she has a husband, and she's given her husband 2 sons. She's joyful. She's very happy. But then she loses it all, and she's filled with despair. In fact, she tells people, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, which means bitter. So she loses it all. But she's about to gain it all back again. There's going to be this sense in which her dignity and her honor will be restored. In fact, it will be restored in a way that's even beyond her own thinking. So fullness will come back into her life once again. And that's an incredible story. And it's often our story too. We may feel blessed, things are going well, but then things aren't going well, and God can restore what's taken away. And that's part of this story. Well, like every other act, Act 4 has 3 scenes. And I just barely introduced these the last time. In chapter 4, verses 1 through 12, the main characters are Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, and 10 elders who act as witnesses. The location is the town gate, and that's where Boaz goes to secure redemption, to figure out who will be the kinsman redeemer. Then in chapter 4, verses 13 through 17 is scene 2, and that involves Boaz, Ruth, Naomi, Obed, a new character, and the town's women. And this happens in the home of Boaz and Ruth, and Naomi and the women of the town have a dialogue. But it's kind of interesting because Naomi doesn't say a word in the dialogue. The women get to say what they need to say to Naomi. So at this point, Naomi doesn't speak again, but the women do. And then finally, it wraps up in scene 3. It's Boaz's extended family. It's basically a genealogy. And where that genealogy leads is rather incredible. It's the beginning of the royal line for the nation of Israel. So the actions of Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz not only bring redemption to a family, Elimelech's family, in essence, it brings redemption to the entire nation of Israel. If you've read the book of Judges, it's a horrible book. I mean, they do some really wicked stuff in the book of Judges, and the people are just far from God. And once they have a judge who brings them back to God, as soon as he dies, they go back to their sinful ways. The nation of Israel needs a real leader. In fact, they had Moses. They had Joshua. But after Joshua, they don't have a leader. Just a bunch of judges, and they're not quite in the same league as a Moses or a Joshua. They need a king. They need somebody to lead them in the ways of God. And it's going to come from that royal line, without giving away too much of the story. Well, scene 1 is where it all begins in chapter 4, verses 1 through 12. And Boaz is going to redeem at the town gate. Well, based upon what we know in Act 3, there's one thing that needs to happen. Boaz needs to meet up with this closer relative who might be oblivious to this whole thing. Boaz knows that he's a relative. He also knows that somebody's a closer relative. But we don't know what the closer relative knows. Does this guy know that Naomi's back in town and that he's first in line to be the redeemer? Because up to this point, he's done nothing for her. He's done nothing for Naomi and nothing for Ruth. Does he even know that he's the closest redeemer? Well, he's about to find out in chapter 4 because Boaz needs to find him and have a conversation with him. Now, Naomi has this incredible plan. Ruth pulls it off to perfection, but Boaz raises that one concern. I would love to do this, but there's somebody else who's first in line, and we have to let that person make their decision first. And that's what chapter 4 is going to be all about. Now, it's interesting that chapter 3 concludes with Naomi saying that Boaz will resolve the issue this day. I think Naomi, for being a widow, understood men pretty well. If a guy's got something in his head that he's got to do, he's not going to put it off. He's going to get it done as quickly as possible. He wants a resolution to this problem. And that's true of Boaz. Because chapter 4 begins with Boaz at the town gate trying to resolve the issue. Now, Boaz has just had more or less a sleepless night, especially when he wakes up at midnight and finds there's a woman in his tent. Chances are he didn't get much sleep the rest of the night. But even so, he doesn't go home and, sleep and take the day off. Now, he's going to try to resolve that issue that particular day. And so that's what chapter 4, Act 4 is all about. And we can divide this particular section, chapter 4, verses 1 through 12, into 4 segments. Boaz is going to prepare for court. He's going to show up for court and put the court together. Then there's going to be a report of the court proceedings. And really, the court proceedings is the dialogue between Boaz and the nearer, closer possible Redeemer. So they're going to dialogue. Then Boaz will give his response to the outcome, and then the public will give their reaction to the outcome as well. Well, with that in mind, let me point out one more thing before we read the text. It's interesting in this particular act that Naomi and Ruth are talked about, but they're not present. So here is this incredible court case, legal proceedings, that will determine Ruth's future, and she's not even there. She's back at home. And so it just kind of shows the patriarchal nature of this society, that the courtroom belongs to the men. And so Boaz will have to step forward and represent both Naomi and Ruth in the court proceedings. They're not going to be there to speak for themselves. So kind of interesting how that unfolds. You know, this whole book has been about Naomi, it's been about Ruth, and now we get to the conclusion. And the two women are at home. They're not even present at the main scene where this decision is going to be made. Well, let me read Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 through 4, and then we'll talk about those verses tonight. It begins in chapter 4, verse 1. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so I will know. For no one has the right to do it, to redeem it, except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it," he said. Well, let's take a look at those verses, and we're going to go kind of slow because some of the cultural things that we run into are very different from the way we do things today. So I'm going to try to explain what's going on behind the scenes here in ancient culture when it comes to these outcomes. So it begins with Boaz. And in the Hebrew, Boaz is actually the first word in the sentence, because Boaz will dominate this scene. So the scene's no longer about Ruth or Naomi, it's Boaz taking the lead. And he will step forward and lead. He's the main character. His words and his actions is what's going to dominate in chapter 4. Now, his first action is to go up to the town gate. It's interesting that we last saw Boaz down on the threshing floor, down on the fields. And he was there with Ruth. He gives Ruth some grain and sends her back home to Naomi. Then he leaves shortly thereafter. And we don't know if he went home first and then went to the town gate, or if he immediately went to the town gate. But we find out that very quickly that morning, he shows up at the town gate. It says he went up to the town gate. And geographically, that was true, because the little town of Bethlehem was on a hill. And down below were the fields. So he literally had to go up back home to the town gate of Bethlehem. Now, the town gate is the ideal place to find people and meet people and talk with people. Because chances are, with Bethlehem being so small, there may have only been one gate, one way into the town and one way out of the town. So if you sat there at the town gate, you could see most people most days. So that's where Boaz goes. He's going to go to the town gate. It's also early in the morning, and probably when the sun comes up, they open the gate. And of course, if you're a farmer, you work based on the sun. So as soon as the sun comes up, you want to go work, and out to the fields you would go. The town gate is also the place where administrative and legal proceedings would take place. It's almost like a city hall or a town hall. It's the place where the elders are, the place where the judges are. In fact, there's an idiom in Hebrew that to go up to the gate means to go to court. And that would be true in this context. So Boaz goes to the town gate, meaning he's looking to go to court. He's got to file some legal proceedings. He has to have a conversation with someone that's going to result in something that needs to be recorded by those in charge of the city. Now, the town gate also has great cultural significance. Boaz sits at the town gate and he waits at the town gate. But Ruth, she sits at home and she waits at home. It was a man's world back in the ancient world. And the public gatherings there at the town gate were run by the men. The legal and administrative matters, well, they were run by the males in Bethlehem. So as Boaz is sitting there, looking around, he sees the nearer kinsman redeemer. He sees the man he's looking for. And at this point, we kind of look at things through Boaz's eyes as he's sitting there waiting for this man to come by, knowing that when he comes by, he's got to stop him, have a conversation with him, and however the conversation turns out, that's going to impact the rest of his life. So this is a huge matter for Boaz. You know, what's going to happen? How's this man going to respond? Because his decision is going to impact the rest of the life of Boaz. And you kind of get the idea. Okay, Boaz is sitting there, and at just the right moment, there goes the near relative. There goes the man that Boaz is looking for. It's almost like it's a coincidence. Remember back in chapter 2? Ruth goes gleaning. She has no idea where she's going. I mean, she's never been to Bethlehem before. Naomi doesn't go with her to guide her to a field that she thinks would be safe for her. Naomi just says, okay, just do whatever you want to do. And so Ruth, on her own, stumbles onto a field that's owned by Boaz. Coincidence. Have you ever had one of those moments where you haven't seen somebody in a long time or haven't heard from them in a long time, and all of a sudden one day, you know, their name just kind of pops into your head? You go, wow, I haven't seen that person in a long time. And before the day ends, they call you, they text you, you bump into them somewhere. You go, wow, what a coincidence. I was just thinking about you today. Now, normally I don't think about you every day, but I was thinking about you today, and, we've contacted each other. Well, some people call that a coincidence. Others may call that a divine appointment. I find it interesting in reading this story that God is not mentioned very often. In many ways it reminds me of the story of Esther, where God's not mentioned at all. Well, God's mentioned a few times in this book. In fact, I think God's mentioned most often when Naomi's mad at him. That's when he's mentioned most. But it's kind of left for the reader to understand this is not a coincidence. This is God putting the story together. This is God making sure that Boaz bumps into this guy at just the right time. And you may have had some of those situations in your life. Maybe you were looking for a job, and you happened to bump into somebody who knew of a job opening in that field that you're an expert in. And you go, wow, prayer answered. Or maybe you're looking for a car and you just can't find one, and somebody says something about, I've got a car for sale and I just want to get rid of the thing, and they mention what make of the car it is, and you go, wow, that's the car I'm looking for. And it comes together. It's amazing how God can put stories together. You may think, if you're married, how you met your spouse. May have appeared to be a coincidence, but it was a divine appointment. God put you together on purpose. God does those things. Somebody says, a coincidence is when God wants to remain anonymous. He's working behind the scenes, making sure it all works out. And we need to be aware of that. Well, Boaz notices the man, and he immediately gets down to business. He says to the man, come over here and sit down. 2 short commands. Come over here, have a seat. And those 2 short commands are going to change this man's life too. Because apparently he's going to hear something he's not aware of. And he's got a major life decision to make. 2 short commands changes the man's life. Now, it's also interesting that Boaz does not call the man by name. Or should I say, the narrator doesn't let Boaz call the man by name. Because this is the little village of Bethlehem. This man is a member of Boaz's clan, his family, extended family. Boaz has talked about him to Ruth. And as soon as Boaz sees him, he knows who he is. Boaz knows the man's name. But the narrator won't let Boaz call him by name. In fact, in the NIV, it says, come over here, my friend. Technically, in the Hebrew, it's so-and-so. Come over here, Mr. So-and-so. And in many ways, the narrator's letting us know Boaz knows the man's name. Perhaps the writer knows the man's name as well, but his name will not be spoken in this book. So we don't know what to call this man other than the potential guardian redeemer. His name is not mentioned. Why? Well, it could be to protect him. This man's got a decision to make. And some other people may not agree with his decision. And if his name is mentioned, well, everybody's going to know. And if his name is mentioned, well, if he has children and grandchildren, they're connected to him, and, people may say something to them as well. So the man's reputation could get ruined. And so the writer decides, my friend or Mr. So-and-so is going to be his name in this particular story. Well, he tells the man to sit down, and chances are he was sitting in some kind of situation where it's a legal proceeding. Because in the next verse, Boaz takes 10 of the elders of the town. Now, it could be that these elders were on their way out of the city gate or the town gate, and Boaz stops them and asks them to stay. Or it's more probable that these 10 elders were on duty that day. So if anybody has a legal proceeding, anybody has a court case, anybody needs something that could be advice or a judgment on something, they are there representing the town to give the judgment. So apparently Boaz is able to not only gather the nearer redeemer, but also the elders as well. And once he gathers them, now we have an official court case. We've got Boaz and the man, and we have the 10 witnesses. And if there's a judgment that needs to be made, well, the 10 elders can make that judgment. If there's an agreement that's made, the 10 elders can witness that and record that so that it's in the town records. So this becomes very official at this point. As a small town, it was normal to have the elders at the town gate. That's where all the legal stuff would take place, the administrative things. They were involved in governing the people, making judgments, giving advice, dealing with outsiders. That was part of what they do. So any legal issue, any social issue, any religious issue would come before these elders at the gate. And Deuteronomy chapter 22 mentions these elders at the gate. So that's how they did things back in the ancient world. It's kind of like a town square today, and you go to court and you've got people there who are in charge of the town, and they can make those particular decisions. It's also interesting that according to rabbinic tradition, having 10 elders was pretty normal. So that's pretty much what you would need is 10 elders, which I'm not sure what happens if 5 say yes and 5 say no, or if there's a disagreement. I always say if it's split 5-5, somebody needs to pray. In fact, all of you need to pray, because God's not divided. God's going to give one answer, not two. So why don't we pray and resolve this thing that way? So he tells them to sit there, and court is about to begin. So verses 3-8 will be the report that comes out of this proceeding. And really, it's the dialogue that takes place between this man and Boaz. And Boaz is trying to solve 3 issues. The first one is there's some land that Elimelech owns. And apparently he didn't sell it before he left for Moab. I don't think Elimelech really wanted to stay 10 years in Moab. Apparently he liked it there, and that's why he stayed for so long. I think he was probably thinking, the famine will last a year, I'll be back next year. But that's not how it turned out. So the land, there has to be an issue. It's got to be redeemed. Second is Elimelech's name, which at this point, his name is pretty much done. If you trace the family line, there's going to be a big stop sign. Because there's Elimelech, his 2 sons, and then there's nobody to pass things on to. So unless somebody steps in and redeems the family name and the family line, it's going to stop right there. And that's not what the Jewish people wanted to see happen. And then there's Naomi. Somebody's got to take care of Naomi. Now, so far, Boaz is doing that unofficially, just out of his goodness of his heart, but officially somebody has to take care of Naomi. So that's the case. That's what he wants to resolve. And in verse 3, again, the guardian redeemer is not named. He is simply called the guardian redeemer. And it could be that this man really doesn't know the story, which in many ways is difficult to believe, because if the man is married, certainly his wife would have told him Naomi's story. The women all gather, at the town square and, chit-chat. Certainly, if he was married, the wife knows the story and would have told her husband. But maybe he just didn't put 2 and 2 together. Maybe he hasn't figured out that he is the guardian redeemer. Or maybe he's just not all that interested. Not sure. Boaz knows the whole thing, but this man seems to know nothing. And when Boaz tells him the story, he goes back to the beginning. And he says, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So, both Boaz and this guardian redeemer are both related to Elimelech. And the guardian redeemer is more closely related to Elimelech than Boaz is. So that's why this is so important for both of them. So, he mentions that Naomi is selling a piece of land. This is the first time in the book that land has been mentioned. And as the reader of this book, you're going, land? Why are we talking about land? Chapter 3 ends with, who's going to marry Ruth? That's the big cliffhanger. Who cares about land? Who's going to be the groom? That's what we really want to know. But Boaz starts out and doesn't even mention Ruth. He mentions land. So, Elimelech owned land. Elimelech had been gone for 10 years, which raises a question: what happened in the last 10 years? Did the land just, lie fallow? Nobody worked the land? Weeds have now owned the land? Is that what happened? Or when the famine ended, did some of the family members look around and say, "Where's Elimelech? Oh, he hasn't returned. Well, we'll just help ourselves to his land. He's not using it. He's not here. We're going to keep it up for him, and whatever, crops we have, we're going to have the profits." So did family work the land in his absence, or did the land just kind of go to waste? We really don't know. There's another issue, and that's this idea that she's selling the land. And in many ways, that's probably not a good translation, because the word that's used can also mean to transfer the right of usage. So you're not really selling it, you're giving someone else the right to use it. The land is still yours, but somebody else can use the land on your behalf. It's the idea that you can use the property, but you can't change the property. For example, if you had this right and you got a piece of land and there were apple trees, you had the right to all the apples on all the trees. But if you noticed a tree you didn't like and you wanted to cut it down, you were not allowed to do that. You couldn't change the land, but you could use the land. So the land still belongs to Naomi. It still, in essence, belongs to Elimelech. But somebody needs to redeem it by using the land. And if they use the land, whatever crops they grow, that could be profit for them. So in many ways, redeeming the land could be a good thing. You don't own the land. You can't pass it along. But you can use it, and whatever profit you made was just extra money for you. Now, it could very well be that on this land is where Naomi and Ruth are living. So you have to let them continue to live there. In fact, you have to take care of them. But after you take care of them, whatever profits you have, those profits are yours. Some of you asked me a really good question that I was thinking of as well and don't have an answer to. Naomi was gone for 10 years. And she shows back up in Bethlehem, and she seems to be living somewhere. The question is, where is that somewhere? Did she have a house that was vacant for 10 years? Is she living in a tent? We really don't know. If she did have a house with Elimelech, did anybody live in that house for the 10 years when they were gone? And did they then move out when Naomi came back? We really don't know. So, in essence, the land remains Elimelech's land. But somebody gets to redeem it by using it for their own benefit. That somewhat raises the question of ownership. Normally, a woman would not own the land. But this was an unusual situation. For a man and his two sons to die, and for the two sons to die before their wives were able to give birth to a son. Because if their wives gave birth to a son, the land would go to them. But there's no one to take the land. There's no male to take the land. Now, Israel and the land is a fascinating story. Remember back in Genesis chapter 12, God promised Abraham, I'm going to give you a land you can call your own. And the land was very important. It's part of the promise. Well, they don't get a land until the days of Joshua. I mean, we could be talking 900 years later. But finally, under Joshua, they get the land, the promised land. And the last part of the book of Joshua, the part that nobody reads, is when they divide up the land among the 12 tribes. I mean, this is boring, okay? Nobody reads that part. But it was very important to the people of Israel because the land was divided in such a way that each tribe got a section. And that section was owned by that tribe. And it was their responsibility to protect their land, their part of the promised land. So the idea was the land could never go out to somebody other than a person in the tribe. The land has to stay in the tribe. And the tribe was made up of clans. So the land needed to stay within the clan. And then the clan was made up of families. And if possible, the land stayed in the family. Father to son, to his son, and so forth, and so forth. So for an Israelite, the land, that's very important. You don't want to lose the land. You don't want that out of your clan. You don't want that out of your family. So that's where the kinsman redeemer idea came along. That way the clan doesn't lose the property. That way somebody else just can't go on the land and claim squatters' rights and, it's mine now. You can't do that. So that's what's at stake. And that's why this is such a big deal. For the Israelites, the land was very important. So, this particular individual, if he wants to redeem the land, he takes care of Naomi, no big deal. He works the land, he gains a profit. From a business standpoint, it's a really good deal. Now, if Naomi passes away and there's no heir, chances are he can claim the land for himself and pass it along to his family. So he may be able to pass this along to his children. So being a guardian redeemer can be a very profitable, good thing. Then Boaz says, I thought I should bring the matter to your attention. That's how the NIV translates it. Literally in the Hebrew, it says, I thought I would uncover your ear. And that phrase, uncover your ear, is a figure of speech. It's an idiom. It literally means, you've got kind of hair on your ear, and I'm going to move the hair away from your ear, and I'm going to whisper something important into your ear. Which means, basically, I'm going to bring something to your attention. I'm going to give you some information, some confidential information, some important information. And the NIV translated it, I'm going to bring the matter to your attention. So this is a big issue. And apparently, the other kinsman redeemer doesn't know about this. Or at least Boaz is treating him as if he doesn't know about this. So, he goes on to say, I'm going to bring this matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it. Well, actually, he's not going to buy it. He's going to acquire it. He's going to take possession of it. He's not going to pay for it. He's simply going to use it. And he's going to redeem it. It stays Naomi's. He's going to use it. And again, he can make a profit from it as well. So the land is being transferred to him. And then it says, I want you to buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of the people. And the question is, those seated there, is he talking about the elders or is he talking about a different group? Well, some people think that these other people happen to be those who happen to be walking around. Oh, there's a court case going on. So they kind of sat down and eavesdrop, small town. Got to know what the news is. Didn't have newspapers back then. So you just kind of had to hang out and figure out what the news is on your own. So is he talking about just bystanders, citizens who happen to be hanging out? The problem is this area was fairly small. And if you were just hanging out, chances are you were not seated, you were standing. So most scholars think that those who are seated there is just another reference to the elders. Because Boaz did tell them to have a seat, and they did. So, again, you need to tell this in front of the elders, which makes sense. You know, if you're going to redeem this, you've got to let the elders know so they can record it in the town records so that if somebody asks, what are you doing out on this, Naomi's field, they'll know that, you've redeemed it and you have a right to be there now. And these elders have to record that information. So this is official business. And if you will redeem it, do so. So he has to make this legal transaction. I'm going to redeem the land, which means I'm going to take care of Naomi. I'm going to take care of her land. And the profits are mine, but I will take care of that family. That's what he's agreeing to do. But if you will not, Boaz says, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it, meaning to redeem it, except you. And I am next in line. So now it's time to make a decision. So if you redeem it, you have the right to do so. And it's interesting how Boaz presents this up to this point. He's being very straightforward with the man. He's being very, according to the law with this man, not pulling a fast one, maybe until the next verse when he mentions Ruth. But at this point, he's, just explaining what's going on. Do you want to redeem it because you have the first right? And if you don't want to redeem it, you don't have to worry about it because I'm next in line and I'm going to do it. But the decision is up to you. You get the final decision. You get the first decision. I will redeem it, he said. And I remember in reading this story the first time, when I read that verse, I'm thinking, you can't do that. Because if you redeem it, you're going to mess up this whole story. I mean, based on chapter 3, Boaz and Ruth have to get together. I mean, that has to be the way the story ends. And you can't mess up this whole story by being the guardian redeemer. You have to say no. But he says yes. And I wonder, did Boaz's heart skip a beat? Did that take him by surprise? Or did Boaz have a trump card that he was going to mention next? Fully expecting this man to say yes, but then playing the trump card so that in front of the elders, everybody would know what the man was really thinking. We're not sure. You can think about that one. He has the right to the land. And from an economic standpoint, you really can't say no. I mean, that's like saying, okay, we're going to give you this land. It's going to cost you, to take care of Naomi. It's going to cost you a couple $1,000, but you're going to make about $25,000 on the deal. Who wouldn't take that? But there's a catch in the next verse. And I'll try to explain that the next time because it gets really tricky. And so you try to figure it out between now and next week I'll explain what Boaz says next and why it's so important and what it would mean for this man to say yes, what it would mean to say no, and what it would mean for Boaz either way. So, interesting story, interesting twist in how this happens. But isn't life like that? There's always that interesting twist. You expect somebody to do something and they don't. You expect somebody to give a certain answer and they give a different answer. And now you're trying to figure out what's going on. Life is that way. It was that way for Boaz too. But God has a plan through the whole story. Well, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this incredible story, for these incredible characters and their lives and the decisions that they had to make, and just the consequences of every decision that they made, and how their life would change if they say yes, and how their life would change if they say no, and how everybody else's life would change based upon their answer too. Father, it's just an incredible story of what happens to us in our lives too. What if we say yes to something? What if we say no to something? What if somebody else says yes to something? How will that impact us? And if they say no, well, what will be the consequences for us? Father, we deal with that every day too. And all along we know you are God. You have a plan. You have a purpose. And we need to trust you. We need to trust your plan and trust your purpose. Thank you for this story. In Jesus' name, amen.